When I asked where my wife's funeral would be, my son-in-law said, "She's already been buried. We didn't want strangers there." 3 days later, she called me crying, "What are you doing with my life?" I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is John, and I am 63 years old. Until 3 days ago, I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning when my son-in-law, Walter, called me. I was sitting in my usual spot at the kitchen table, the same oak table where Jennifer and I had shared breakfast for 42 years. The coffee had gone cold in my hands while I stared at the empty chair across from me, the chair where my wife should have been sitting. "John." Walter's voice came through the phone, flat and emotionless, like he was reading from a script. "I'm calling about the arrangements." My chest tightened. Jennifer had been in the hospital for 2 weeks, and the doctors kept saying she was stable, that we just needed to wait and see. But something in Walter's tone made my blood run cold. "What arrangements?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "The funeral," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "It's done. Jennifer was buried yesterday afternoon." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the phone slip in my trembling hand, nearly dropping it onto the worn linoleum floor. "What do you mean, buried? Where? When?" "Peaceful ceremony," Walter continued, his voice still that same mechanical tone. "Small, intimate, just immediate family." Immediate family. The words echoed in my head as I tried to process what he was telling me. I was her husband of 4 decades. If anyone was immediate family, it was me. "Walter, I don't understand. Where was I? Why wasn't I told?" There was a pause, and when he spoke again, I could almost hear the smirk in his voice. "We didn't want strangers there, John. Jennifer wouldn't have wanted that." Strangers. He called me a stranger at my own wife's funeral. I sat there in stunned silence, the phone pressed against my ear, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat pounding like a drum. Through the kitchen window, I could see the garden Jennifer had tended for 25 years. Her roses were still blooming, red and vibrant, as if they didn't know their caretaker was gone. "You had no right," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Actually, John, we had every right. Olivia is her next of kin, and as her husband, I was acting on her behalf. The doctors said Jennifer's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and we had to make quick decisions." Next of kin. Our daughter Olivia was 35 years old, married to this man for 8 years, and apparently she had decided that her own father didn't deserve to say goodbye to her mother. "Where is she buried?" I asked, my voice stronger now, fueled by a growing anger that I could feel building in my chest. "Meadowbrook Cemetery, Section 12. Simple headstone, like she would have wanted." Like she would have wanted. How would Walter know what Jennifer would have wanted? In all the years they'd been married, I'd watched him treat my daughter well enough, but he barely spoke to Jennifer beyond polite pleasantries at family dinners. Yet here he was, acting like he knew her final wishes better than her own husband. "I'm going there now," I said, already standing up from the table, the chair scraping against the floor. "That's your choice, John, but don't expect any grand gestures. It's done. She's gone." The line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen, holding the silent phone, feeling like the world had shifted beneath my feet. Everything looked the same. The morning light streaming through the yellow curtains Jennifer had sewn herself, the ceramic rooster she'd bought at a garage sale 15 years ago sitting on the windowsill, the coffee maker still gurgling as it finished brewing the pot I'd started before Walter's call. But nothing was the same. Nothing would ever be the same again. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the back door and headed for my truck. The drive to Meadowbrook Cemetery took 23 minutes, and with every mile my confusion grew deeper. How had this happened? How had my own family excluded me from the most important moment of my life? Jennifer and I had talked about death, of course. When you've been married as long as we had when you're both past 60, it's not a conversation you can avoid forever. But in all those talks, sitting on the porch swing on summer evenings or lying in bed during sleepless nights, she had never once mentioned wanting a small ceremony. If anything, she'd always said she wanted a celebration, wanted people to remember the good times. The cemetery gates were open when I arrived, the black iron twisted into elaborate scrollwork that had probably been impressive 50 years ago, but now just looked tired. I drove slowly through the winding paths, past rows of granite headstones and aging monuments, looking for Section 12. When I found it, my heart sank. There, in a corner spot beneath a small oak tree, was a simple gray headstone with Jennifer's name etched into the stone. Jennifer Marie Harrison, beloved wife and mother. The dates showed she was 60 years old when she died, taken too soon from a world that still needed her gentle presence. I knelt down beside the grave, the grass still loose and dark where it had been recently disturbed. The earth smelled fresh and damp, mixed with the scent of the roses someone had left on the grave. Pink roses, Jennifer's favorites. But as I knelt there, something felt wrong. The grave looked new, too new. The headstone was pristine without a single mark of weathering. Even the fastest monument companies needed at least a week to engrave and install a headstone, especially something this elaborate. I ran my fingers over the carved letters of her name, and that's when I noticed something else. The dates were wrong, not the birth date. That was correct, March 15th, 1964. But the death date showed October 13th, yesterday, Monday. Walter had said she was buried yesterday, Tuesday, but the headstone said she died on Monday. I pulled out my phone and called the hospital where Jennifer had been staying. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached her nurse, a kind woman named Sarah who had been taking care of my wife for the past week. "Mr. Harrison, I'm so sorry for your loss. How are you holding up?" "Sarah, can you tell me when exactly Jennifer passed away?" There was a pause. "Sir, Mrs. Harrison was transferred on Monday morning. I assume she was going home with family. Is everything all right?" "Transferred. Not deceased. Transferred." "Sarah, who authorized the transfer?" "Let me check the records. It says here that her daughter, Olivia Watson, signed the discharge papers. Medical transport picked her up around 10 a.m. Monday morning." I hung up without saying goodbye, my hands shaking as I stared at the headstone in front of me. Jennifer hadn't died. She had been transferred from the hospital by our daughter, and somehow Walter and Olivia had arranged for this grave, this ceremony, this elaborate lie. But why? I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard Jennifer had loved so much. The house felt enormous and empty as I walked through the front door, the silence pressing against me like a weight. I went to our bedroom and opened the closet where Jennifer kept her clothes. Everything was still there, her favorite blue dress, the sweater I'd bought her last Christmas, the worn jeans she gardened in. If she had really died, wouldn't someone have gone through her things? In her jewelry box on the dresser, I found her wedding ring, the simple gold band I'd placed on her finger 42 years ago. She never took it off. Not even when she was in the hospital. But here it was, sitting in its velvet slot, like she had carefully placed it there before leaving. I picked up the ring, feeling its familiar weight in my palm, and that's when I saw the note tucked underneath the jewelry box. It was written in Jennifer's careful handwriting. "John, if you find this, I'm safe. Don't trust Walter. Something is very wrong. I love you. J." My legs gave out and I sank onto the edge of our bed, clutching the note and her wedding ring. Jennifer was alive. She was alive and she was in trouble, and somehow our daughter and son-in-law had convinced the world that she was dead. The phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. I looked at the caller ID and didn't recognize the number, but something made me answer it anyway. "Hello?" The voice that came through the line was shaky, tearful, and unmistakably familiar. "John? Oh God, John, is that you?" It was Jennifer. Jennifer. My voice cracked as I spoke her name, the word barely escaping my throat. "Jennifer, is that really you?" The sobbing on the other end of the line was answer enough. After 42 years of marriage, I knew the sound of my wife's tears better than I knew my own heartbeat. But hearing her voice felt like witnessing a miracle and a nightmare at the same time. "John, thank God," she whispered, her voice hoarse and strained. I've been trying to reach you for 2 days, but they took my phone. I finally found an old cell phone in the kitchen drawer where they're keeping me. Where are you? Are you hurt? Jennifer, there's a grave with your name on it. Everyone thinks you're dead. I know. Her voice broke again. I saw the obituary online. John, what are they doing to our life? What are they telling people about me? I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Tell me where you are. I'm coming to get you right now. I don't know exactly. It's a house about an hour outside town near some woods. There are blue shutters and a red mailbox at the end of a long gravel driveway. John, I'm scared. They told me things about you, terrible things, and I didn't know what to believe. My blood ran cold. What kind of things? Jennifer's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They said you've been having episodes, that you've become dangerous. They showed me medical papers saying you have early-stage dementia and that you've been making threats against me. That's impossible. I've never threatened you in my entire life. I know that now. But John, they had documents. Official-looking papers from Dr. Martinez's office saying you've been prescribed medication for violent tendencies. They said the doctors recommended I be moved to a safe location until you could get proper treatment. Dr. Martinez had been our family physician for 15 years. The idea that he would write such documents without my knowledge was absurd, but I could understand how Jennifer might have been confused and frightened. They're lying, Jennifer, all of it. I haven't seen Dr. Martinez in 6 months, and that was just for my annual checkup. You know me better than anyone. Have I ever shown any signs of dementia? Have I ever raised a hand to you? Of course not. That's why this is so confusing. But Walter was very convincing. He said you'd been hiding it well, that people with early dementia can mask their symptoms. He had Olivia crying, saying she was terrified for my safety. Our daughter. Our own daughter had participated in this elaborate deception. I felt sick to my stomach thinking about it. Jennifer, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Whatever they told you is a lie. I am not sick, I am not dangerous, and I would never hurt you. They've been planning something, and I think it has to do with money. There was a long pause, and when Jennifer spoke again, her voice was steadier. The house. John, this house where they're keeping me. It's furnished, but it feels wrong. Like someone set it up quickly. And there are papers everywhere. Legal documents spread out on the dining room table. I saw our names on some of them. What kind of legal documents? I couldn't read them all, but I saw words like power of attorney and estate planning. There were bank statements, too, from accounts I've never seen before. My stomach dropped. Power of attorney would give them control over all our financial decisions. Combined with fake medical documentation claiming I was mentally incompetent, they could potentially take everything we'd worked for over 4 decades. Jennifer, how long have they been planning this? When did Olivia first approach you about my supposed condition? It started about 3 months ago. She began visiting more often, asking if you'd been acting strange, if you'd been forgetting things. I thought she was just being a concerned daughter. Then Walter started showing up, asking about our finances, saying they wanted to help us plan for retirement. 3 months. They had been working on this for 3 months, slowly building their case, gathering information, and positioning themselves to take control. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The hospital, I said, more to myself than to Jennifer. They arranged for you to be transferred from the hospital. How did they convince you to go with them? Walter came to my room Monday morning with discharge papers. He said you had signed them, that you wanted me to recover at a quiet place away from the stress of the hospital. He had a medical transport van waiting outside. John, I was still groggy from the medication, and when he showed me your supposed signature on the papers, I believed him. And Olivia. Where was she during all this? She was crying, saying she was so worried about both of us. She hugged me and promised everything would be okay, that they just needed to keep me safe until you got the help you needed. Jennifer's voice turned bitter. I trusted her. I trusted our daughter. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of betrayal settling over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about money. This was about our own child deciding that we were obstacles to be managed rather than parents to be loved and respected. Jennifer, I found your wedding ring in the jewelry box upstairs, along with a note you left me. You knew something was wrong. I started having doubts on Tuesday, the day after they brought me here. Walter's story kept changing. First he said you were getting outpatient treatment. Then he said you'd been hospitalized. And when I asked to call you, he said your doctors had recommended no contact until you were stable. Why didn't they just take your phone away completely? They did, eventually. But I had hidden that old flip phone in my purse, the one I used to keep in the car for emergencies. They didn't think to look for it. Her voice grew urgent. John, I overheard them talking this morning. They were discussing something about 48 hours. Walter kept saying they just needed to maintain the story for 48 more hours and then everything would be finalized. 48 hours from when? From the fake funeral? From when they first moved her? I tried to calculate the timeline, but my mind was racing too fast to focus on details. Jennifer, I'm going to find you. Can you see anything outside the windows that might help me locate the house? There's a red barn about half a mile down the road, and I can see a water tower in the distance with something written on it, but I can't make out the words from here. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I knew the area around town well enough to narrow down the possibilities. Listen to me, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. I want you to hide that phone somewhere safe, but keep it with you. If you can, try to take pictures of any documents you see, especially anything with our names or signatures on them. I'm scared, John. What if they catch me? What if they realize I've been talking to you? They won't. You're stronger than they think you are. You survived 60 years on this earth, raised a daughter, and helped me build a life from nothing. You can handle whatever they throw at you for one more day. There was a sound in the background, voices getting closer. I have to go, Jennifer whispered urgently. They're coming back. John, I love you. Find me. I love you too. I'm coming for you, I promise. The line went dead. I sat there in our bedroom, surrounded by the life we'd built together, holding her wedding ring in one hand and the silent phone in the other. My wife was alive, but she was being held against her will by our own daughter and son-in-law as part of some elaborate scheme to steal our life savings. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated both of us. Jennifer was stronger and smarter than they realized, and I was far from the confused, helpless old man they apparently thought I was. I walked to my desk and pulled out a yellow legal pad, the same kind I'd used for 40 years in my job as a construction supervisor. At the top of the page, I wrote "Timeline" and began listing everything I could remember about the past 3 months. Every visit from Olivia, every conversation with Walter, every small detail that I had dismissed as normal family interaction. As I wrote, a pattern began to emerge. Walter's sudden interest in our finances. Olivia's questions about my health and memory. The way they had both encouraged Jennifer to add Olivia's name to certain bank accounts just as a safety precaution. They hadn't just planned to fake Jennifer's death. They had been systematically positioning themselves to take control of everything we owned. The fake funeral was just the final step in a much larger conspiracy. By the time I finished writing, it was past midnight, and I had filled 6 pages with details and connections I hadn't seen before. Tomorrow, I would start making calls. I would find that red barn and water tower, and I would bring my wife home. But first, I was going to find out exactly how deep this conspiracy went and who else was involved, because something told me that Walter and Olivia hadn't orchestrated this alone. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and clutching Jennifer's wedding ring, I made a promise to myself and to her. By the time this was over, they would regret the day they decided to tear apart our family for money. They thought they were dealing with a confused old man. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. I woke up at dawn with Jennifer's wedding ring still clutched in my palm, the metal warm from my grip. Sleep had come in fragments, interrupted by nightmares of empty graves and my daughter's tears that I now knew were manufactured. But the morning brought clarity, and with it, a cold determination that surprised me with its intensity. My first call was to Dr. Martinez's office. The receptionist, Maria, had known me for over a decade, and her voice was warm with genuine concern when she heard about Jennifer's supposed death. Mr. Harrison, I am so sorry for your loss. Dr. Martinez wanted to call you personally, but we weren't sure if you were receiving visitors yet. Maria, I need to ask you something very important. In the past 6 months, has Dr. Martinez written any reports about my mental health? Any documentation about dementia or violent behavior? There was a pause. Mr. Harrison, you know I can't discuss medical records over the phone, but no, definitely not. Your last visit was in April for your annual physical, and your cognitive screening was completely normal. Dr. Martinez actually noted in your file how sharp and alert you seemed for someone your age. The relief I felt was quickly overshadowed by anger. Walter and Olivia had forged medical documents using our family doctor's name. This wasn't just family manipulation anymore. This was fraud. Maria, I need to see Dr. Martinez today. It's an emergency. He has a full schedule, but let me see what I can do. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Dr. Martinez's office, watching him examine copies of the documents Walter had shown Jennifer. His face grew darker with each page he turned. John, these are completely fabricated, he said, setting the papers down with disgust. The letterhead is wrong, the signature is forged, and the medical terminology is all incorrect. Whoever created these didn't even bother to research proper diagnostic procedures. Can you give me a written statement saying these are fraudulent? Absolutely. In fact, I'm going to report this to the medical board and the police. Using a physician's credentials to create false medical documents is a serious crime. Dr. Martinez handed me an official letter on his practice letterhead, clearly stating that I had never been diagnosed with dementia or violent tendencies, and that the documents in question were completely fraudulent. It was the first piece of evidence in what I suspected would become a much larger collection. My next stop was First National Bank, where Jennifer and I had done our banking for 35 years. Tom Bradley, the branch manager, had handled our mortgage and helped us with financial planning over the years. When I walked into his office, his face immediately fell. John, I was so shocked to hear about Jennifer. Please accept my deepest condolences. Tom, Jennifer isn't dead. She's being held somewhere against her will by my daughter and son-in-law. I need you to help me understand what they've been doing with our accounts. Tom's expression shifted from sympathy to confusion to concern. John, are you feeling all right? Because Walter and Olivia were here just last week with death certificates and power of attorney documents. They had death certificates? Already? Well, yes. Olivia was crying, saying they needed to access certain accounts to pay for funeral expenses and settle debts. She had all the proper paperwork. My hands clenched into fists. Tom, I need you to print out every transaction on all our accounts for the past 6 months, and I need to see exactly what paperwork they presented to you. Tom hesitated. John, I'm going to need some form of identification and verification. I handed him Dr. Martinez's letter. Read this first, then call Dr. Martinez if you need confirmation. What they showed you was fraudulent. It took Tom 30 minutes to pull all the records, and with each page that came out of the printer, the scope of Walter and Olivia's betrayal became clearer. They had been systematically draining our accounts for months. Look at this, Tom said, pointing to a series of transactions from August. $55,000 transferred to an account under Olivia's name. The memo says medical expenses for John Harrison. I stared at the number. $55,000. That was more than half of our emergency savings account, money we had carefully saved over decades for exactly this kind of situation, a real medical emergency, not a manufactured one. Here's another one, Tom continued, his voice growing more concerned. $38,000 to Harrison Family Trust. But John, you don't have a family trust registered with us. The Harrison Family Trust, a completely fabricated entity that Walter had probably set up to funnel our money into accounts he controlled. I felt sick thinking about how long they must have been planning this. Tom, what about our property accounts, the lakeside cabin and the rental property downtown? Tom's fingers flew across his keyboard, and his face grew pale. John, according to our records, both properties were sold 3 weeks ago. The proceeds, $128,000, were deposited into the Harrison family trust account. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. The lakeside cabin had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather had built it with his own hands in 1942, and Jennifer and I had spent our honeymoon there. The rental property downtown had been our retirement plan, providing steady income that would have supported us comfortably in our later years. How is that possible? I never signed anything. Tom pulled up digital copies of the sale documents on his computer screen. There was my signature, bold and confident, on papers authorizing the sale of both properties. Except I had never seen those papers before in my life. "Tom, that's not my signature." He leaned closer to the screen, then pulled out a signature card from my file for comparison. Even to my untrained eye, the differences were obvious. The forged signature was close, but the N in Harrison was wrong and the overall slant was too steep. "You're right," Tom said quietly. "John, I think you need to call the police." But first I had one more stop to make. I drove to the courthouse downtown where property records were kept. If Walter and Olivia had forged documents to sell our properties, there would be a paper trail, and I wanted to see exactly what they had filed. The clerk at the property records office was an elderly woman named Ruth who had worked there for 40 years. When I explained what I was looking for, she disappeared into the back room and returned with a thick file folder. "Here are the sale records for both properties," she said, spreading the documents across the counter. "Though I have to say, Mr. Harrison, these sales happened awfully fast. Usually there's more paperwork, more time for inspections and negotiations." I studied the documents carefully. The sale prices were well below market value. The cabin had sold for $45,000 when it was easily worth $75,000, and the downtown property had gone for $83,000 when similar properties were selling for over $100,000. "Ruth, who handled these sales? What real estate company?" She pointed to a stamp at the bottom of each document. "Prestige Property Solutions. It's a relatively new company, been in business maybe 2 years." I had never heard of Prestige Property Solutions, but something about the name nagged at me. I thanked Ruth and headed home, my mind spinning with questions and a growing sense of urgency. Back at the house, I spread all the documents across our dining room table: Dr. Martinez's letter, the bank records, the property sale documents, and the timeline I had written the night before. The pattern was becoming clear, but there were still pieces missing. I picked up the phone and called information, asking for the number of Prestige Property Solutions. When I reached their office, a cheerful receptionist answered. "Prestige Property Solutions, this is Kelly. How can I help you?" "I'm calling about some properties that were recently sold through your company. The Harrison properties, a cabin and a downtown rental." "Oh yes, those were handled by Mr. Watson personally. He said they were family properties that needed to be liquidated quickly for medical expenses." Mr. Watson. Walter's last name was Watson. "Can you tell me more about Mr. Watson? Is he an agent with your company?" "Actually, Mr. Watson owns the company. He started Prestige about 2 years ago. Very professional, specializes in quick sales for families in crisis situations." I hung up without another word. Walter didn't just participate in selling our properties. He had created an entire fake real estate company to facilitate the theft. This wasn't opportunistic greed. This was a carefully planned, long-term conspiracy. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw a photo that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of legal documents spread across a table, and I could clearly see Jennifer's signature on what appeared to be a will. The text message below the photo was from Jennifer. "Found these hidden in bedroom. They have new will with my signature. Everything goes to Olivia. John, I never signed this." I stared at the image, zooming in on the signature. It was a good forgery, better than the ones they had used for the property sales, but I could see subtle differences. The F in Jennifer was too elaborate, and she always made a small loop in her R that was missing in this version. As I studied the forged will, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just about stealing our current assets. They were positioning themselves to inherit everything we owned by creating legal documents that would supersede any legitimate will we might have had. I thought about the 48-hour timeline Jennifer had overheard. What happened after 48 hours? What would be finalized? Then it hit me. If Jennifer remained dead for a certain period of time, and if they had forged documents showing that she had changed her will before her death, they could claim the entire inheritance without any legal challenges from me. They just needed enough time for the fraudulent paperwork to be processed through the system, but they had made several critical mistakes. They had underestimated my determination to find the truth. They had left a paper trail that a careful investigation could follow, and most importantly, they had failed to account for Jennifer's intelligence and resourcefulness. I gathered all the documents into a file folder and headed for my truck. It was time to visit the sheriff's office, and this time I had enough evidence to demand a full investigation. As I drove through town, I passed the cemetery where they had staged Jennifer's fake funeral. The sight of that headstone with her name on it filled me with renewed anger, but also with something else, a cold, calculating determination. They had tried to erase my wife from the world and steal the life we had built together. But Jennifer was alive, and I had proof of their crimes. Now it was time to make them pay for every lie they had told and every document they had forged. The game was about to change, and this time I was going to be the one setting the rules. Sheriff Dan Morrison had been a friend for over 20 years. We had served together on the volunteer fire department, and our wives had been in the same book club before Jennifer got too busy with her garden. When I walked into his office that afternoon carrying my folder of evidence, I could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between professional duty and personal disbelief. "John, sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Tom Bradley called me from the bank. He's concerned about you, says you're making some serious accusations about Olivia and Walter." I set the folder on his desk and opened it carefully. "Dan, I need you to look at this evidence with fresh eyes. Forget that you know me. Forget that you've watched Olivia grow up. Just look at the facts." For the next hour, I walked him through everything. The forged medical documents, the fraudulent property sales, the bank transfers, and Walter's fake real estate company. Dan's expression grew more serious with each revelation, and by the time I showed him Jennifer's photo of the forged will, he was leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. "John, if even half of this is true, we're talking about multiple felonies: elder abuse, fraud, forgery, identity theft. The list goes on." "It's all true, Dan, and there's more." I pulled out my phone and showed him the messages Jennifer had sent from the house where they were keeping her. "My wife is alive and she's being held against her will. I need you to help me find her." Dan studied the photos on my phone, then picked up his desk phone. "Sally, I need you to pull everything we have on Prestige Property Solutions and run a background check on Walter Watson. Also, call Dr. Martinez and ask him to come in with those fraudulent medical documents." He hung up and looked at me directly. "John, I'm going to be straight with you. This is the kind of case that destroys families permanently. If we move forward with this investigation, there's no going back. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Jennifer, alone and frightened in some remote house, believing that her own family had turned against her. I thought about 42 years of marriage, of building a life together through good times and bad, of the promise I had made to love and protect her until death do us part. "Dan, they already destroyed our family when they decided to steal our life and fake my wife's death. I'm just trying to save what's left of it." 20 minutes later, Sally returned with a computer printout and a grim expression. "Sheriff, you're going to want to see this. Prestige Property Solutions was incorporated 18 months ago by Walter Watson, but get this. The business address is a P.O. box, and the phone number goes to a voicemail service. There's no actual office." She handed Dan another sheet of paper. "And here's Walter's background check. He's got 2 prior arrests for financial fraud in Alabama, both from before he married Olivia. Charges were dropped in both cases due to insufficient evidence." Financial fraud. My son-in-law was a career criminal, and my daughter had either been fooled by him or had become his willing accomplice. The thought made my stomach turn. "There's more," Sally continued. I called the county clerk's office about those property sales. They said it was unusual because both sales were handled as emergency liquidations, which means they bypassed the normal waiting periods and inspection requirements. Someone paid extra fees to rush them through. Dan nodded grimly. What about the death certificate they used at the bank? That's the interesting part. I called the Vital Records office, and there's no death certificate on file for Jennifer Harrison. Whatever they showed the bank was completely fabricated. The evidence was overwhelming, but I still needed to find Jennifer. I pulled out the photos she had sent me of the house where they were keeping her, the blue shutters, the red mailbox, the red barn in the distance. Dan, can you help me locate this house? Jennifer said it was about an hour outside town and she could see a water tower with writing on it. Dan studied the photos on my phone, then called in one of his deputies, a young man named Rick who had grown up in the area. Rick, take a look at these photos. Do you recognize this location? Rick squinted at the screen, then his face lit up. That looks like the old Morrison place. No relation to you, Sheriff. It's about 45 minutes out on County Road 12. Been empty for years, but I heard someone was renting it recently. Who owns the property now? Let me check the county records. Rick disappeared and returned 10 minutes later with a property deed. It's owned by something called Harrison Family Trust, purchased 6 months ago for $68,000. The Harrison Family Trust, again. Walter had been planning this for at least 6 months, long enough to buy a remote property where he could hide Jennifer while they executed their plan. Dan stood up and reached for his equipment belt. John, I want you to stay here while we check out this property. If Jennifer is being held against her will, this becomes a hostage situation, and I can't have civilians involved. Dan, she's my wife. I'm not sitting here while— You're not sitting here, he interrupted. You're going to the district attorney's office to file formal charges. We need to move fast on this because if Walter realizes we're investigating, he might panic and do something desperate. An hour later, I was sitting across from District Attorney Patricia Hernandez, a sharp woman in her 50s who listened intently as I recounted the entire story. She took notes constantly, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting to see specific documents. Mr. Harrison, based on what you've shown me, I'm prepared to file charges for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, identity theft, and kidnapping. But I want to be clear about something. If your daughter was involved in planning this conspiracy, she will face the same charges as her husband. The reality of that statement hit me like a physical blow. My daughter, the little girl I had taught to ride a bike and helped with homework, could be facing years in prison. But then I thought about the forged signatures, the manipulated bank accounts, the elaborate deception that had torn our family apart. Patricia, I understand. Justice has to be blind, even when it involves family. My phone buzzed with another message from Jennifer. This time it was a photo of Walter and another man I didn't recognize, both of them carrying boxes out of the house. The text read, "They're moving everything. Heard them say something about heading to the airport tonight. I think they're planning to run." I showed the message to Patricia, and her expression hardened. They're destroying evidence and preparing to flee. This just became a time-critical situation. She picked up her phone and called Dan's direct line. Sheriff, we need to move now. They're destroying evidence and may be planning to flee the jurisdiction. While Patricia coordinated with the sheriff's office, I stared at the photo Jennifer had sent. The man with Walter was tall and thin, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. Something about his posture seemed familiar, but I couldn't place where I might have seen him before. Then it hit me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found what I was looking for, a photo from Olivia's birthday party 2 years ago. There, in the background, was the same man talking to Walter near the buffet table. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. Walter had been planning this for years, possibly since before he even married my daughter. He had identified us as targets, researched our assets, and systematically positioned himself to steal everything we had worked for. But the most devastating realization was yet to come. As I sat in the district attorney's office, waiting for news from the raid on the house, I began to understand the full scope of what Walter and Olivia had done. They hadn't just stolen our money and property. They had stolen our identities, our relationships, and our trust in each other. They had turned daughter against mother, husband against wife, and family against family. They had weaponized love itself, using our deepest bonds against us. Patricia's phone rang, and she answered it immediately. "Sheriff, did you find her?" I could only hear Patricia's side of the conversation, but her expression told me everything I needed to know. "They got away? How long ago? And Mrs. Harrison?" "I see." "Yes, bring her here immediately." She hung up and turned to me with mixed news written across her face. "John, they found Jennifer. She's safe but shaken up. Walter and his accomplice fled about 30 minutes before the sheriff arrived, and they took most of the evidence with them. But Jennifer's okay. She's okay. Dan is bringing her here now, and then we'll take her to the hospital for a checkup. But John, there's something else you need to know." My heart clenched. "What is it?" "They found Olivia at the house, too. She wasn't with Walter when he fled. She was locked in a back bedroom crying and asking for you." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "Locked in? You mean she was a prisoner too?" "That's what it looks like. Sheriff Morrison said she was hysterical, claiming that Walter had threatened to hurt both you and Jennifer if she didn't cooperate with his plan. She said she never intended for things to go this far." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process this new information. Had my daughter been a victim all along, manipulated and threatened into compliance? Or was this just another layer of deception? 20 minutes later, the door opened and Jennifer walked in, escorted by a female deputy. She looked exhausted and frightened, but when she saw me, she broke free from the deputy and ran into my arms. "John," she whispered against my chest, her whole body shaking. "I thought I was going crazy. I thought you really were sick, and I didn't know what to believe." I held her tightly, feeling the solid reality of her presence after 3 days of believing she was dead. "It's over now," I said, though I knew that wasn't entirely true. "You're safe." Behind Jennifer, I could see another figure in the doorway, Olivia, flanked by 2 deputies, her face streaked with tears and her clothes disheveled. When our eyes met, she mouthed a single word: "Daddy." The little girl who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories was gone, replaced by a 35-year-old woman who had either betrayed us completely or been trapped in a web of manipulation and threats. As I held Jennifer and looked at our daughter, I realized that the hardest part of this ordeal was just beginning. We had found each other, but now we had to figure out if we could ever trust each other again. And somewhere out there, Walter was still free, with access to accounts containing hundreds of thousands of our dollars and nothing left to lose. The interview room at the sheriff's office felt like a courtroom where our family's fate would be decided. Jennifer sat beside me, her hand clasped tightly in mine, while across the table Olivia faced us with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. District Attorney Hernandez sat at the head of the table with a digital recorder between us, and Sheriff Morrison leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. "Olivia," Patricia began, her voice professional but not unkind, "we need you to tell us everything from the beginning. When did Walter first approach you about your parents' finances?" Our daughter took a shaky breath and wiped her eyes with a tissue. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It was about 2 years ago, right after his gambling debts started piling up." Gambling debts. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Walter hadn't just been greedy, he had been desperate. "How much did he owe?" Patricia asked. "At first he said it was just $15,000, but it kept growing. Every time I thought we had it under control, he would confess to owing more money to different people." Olivia's voice cracked. By last spring, he owed over $80,000 to some very dangerous people. I felt Jennifer's hand tighten in mine. $80,000 was more than our annual income before retirement. No wonder Walter had been so interested in our finances. "Tell us about the first time he mentioned your parents' money," Sheriff Morrison said from his position by the wall. Olivia looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. "Daddy, he said you and Mom had way more money than you needed, that you were just sitting on it while younger people struggled to get by. At first it sounded almost reasonable, like maybe you could help us with a loan. But we would have helped you if you had just asked, Jennifer said, her voice filled with pain. You know that, don't you? I know that now, Mom. But Walter, he has a way of making things sound logical even when they're not. He said you would never agree to loan us that much money, that you'd lecture us about responsibility and make us feel guilty. That hurt because it was partially true. If Olivia had come to us asking for $80,000 to pay gambling debts, we probably would have insisted on getting Walter into treatment first, but we never would have abandoned our daughter in her time of need. Patricia leaned forward. When did the plan change from asking for help to stealing it? It happened gradually. First, Walter suggested that maybe I should be added to some of your bank accounts just in case of emergencies. He said it was common for adult children to have access to their parents' finances. Olivia's voice grew stronger as she continued. Then he started talking about how unfair it was that everything would go to me eventually anyway. So why should we have to wait until you died? The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. My own daughter had been convinced that our deaths were just an inconvenience delaying her inheritance. Whose idea was it to fake your mother's death? Sheriff Morrison asked bluntly. Olivia flinched as if she had been slapped. Walter's. He said it would be temporary, just long enough to access the money and pay off his debts. He promised that once the danger was over, we would find Mom alive somewhere and say there had been a terrible misunderstanding. And you believed that? Jennifer's voice was sharp with disbelief. I wanted to believe it. Mom, by that time, Walter's creditors were making threats. Not just against him, but against me, too. One of them showed up at my work. Another one followed me to the grocery store. I was terrified. Patricia made a note on her pad. Did Walter show you evidence of these threats? He showed me text messages and emails, photos of our house taken from the street, license plate numbers of cars that had supposedly been following us. Olivia paused, then looked up with dawning realization. I never thought to verify any of it. What if some of those threats were fake, too? The possibility hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Had Walter fabricated the danger to manipulate Olivia's cooperation? It would fit with everything else we had learned about his character. Tell us about the medical documents, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The ones claiming I had dementia. Olivia's shoulders slumped. Walter said he had a friend who could create authentic-looking medical records. He needed them to convince Mom that it wasn't safe for her to be around you. I knew it was wrong, Daddy, but I was so scared of what would happen if we couldn't pay those debts. What about Dr. Martinez's signature? How did Walter forge that? He had me get a copy of one of your old medical records during Mom's last appointment. He said he needed to see the format so he could help you apply for some kind of senior discount program. Olivia's voice broke completely. I stole your medical records from the doctor's office and gave them to my husband so he could forge documents to steal from you. The weight of that confession settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Our daughter hadn't just been manipulated. She had actively participated in the conspiracy, even if she believed she was protecting herself and Walter from danger. Patricia continued her questioning methodically. Tell us about the fake funeral. Walter arranged everything. He said the funeral home owed him a favor from some construction work he had done for them. They agreed to create a fake ceremony and provide a temporary grave marker. The plan was to remove it after a few weeks and say there had been a clerical error. A fake funeral. The image of that headstone with Jennifer's name on it would haunt me for the rest of my life, but knowing it had been staged didn't make it less painful. What about the property sales? Sheriff Morrison asked. Your father's signature was forged on those documents. Walter said he could handle that part without involving me directly. I knew the properties were being sold, but I didn't ask for details because I didn't want to know how he was doing it. Willful ignorance. Our daughter had chosen not to know the details of how we were being robbed because knowing would have made her complicity impossible to deny. Olivia, I said, my voice heavy with sadness, at what point did you realize this had gone too far? She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. When I saw the forged will, Daddy. Walter had created documents that would have given us everything immediately, not just enough to pay his debts. That's when I understood that he never intended to stop with just solving the gambling problem. "What do you mean?" Patricia asked. "The will he forged didn't just leave everything to me. It specifically excluded you, Daddy. It said that Mom had decided you were mentally incompetent and couldn't be trusted with the inheritance." Olivia's voice was barely audible now. That's when I realized Walter wasn't trying to save our marriage or protect us from creditors. He was trying to steal everything you had worked for your entire lives. The room fell silent as we processed this revelation. Walter's plan had been far more comprehensive and malicious than we had initially understood. He hadn't just wanted to steal our current assets. He had wanted to ensure that I would be left with nothing even after Jennifer's fake death was revealed. "Is that when you tried to stop him?" Jennifer asked. Olivia nodded. "I told him we had to call it off, that we had to tell you the truth and figure out another way to handle the debt situation. That's when he—" She trailed off, touching her wrist gingerly. "That's when he what?" Sheriff Morrison's voice was sharp. "That's when he grabbed my wrist and twisted it until I screamed. He said it was too late to back out, that we were all in too deep. He said if I tried to warn you, he would tell his creditors that Daddy had the money they were owed, and they would come after you instead of us." Another manipulation, another layer of threats designed to ensure Olivia's continued cooperation. But this time, the threat had been physical violence against our daughter herself. "Is that why he locked you in the bedroom at the safe house?" Patricia asked. "When the police surrounded the house, Walter panicked. He said I had become a liability, that I knew too much and couldn't be trusted. He handcuffed me to the bed frame and said he would come back for me once he had figured out how to salvage the situation." "But he didn't come back?" I observed. "No. His accomplice, a man named Terry, who was supposed to help us disappear, told Walter that the police had too much evidence. Terry said their only option was to take whatever money they could access and run to Mexico immediately. So Walter had abandoned our daughter when his plan fell apart, leaving her to face the consequences alone. In a twisted way, that gave me some satisfaction. It proved that Walter had never truly loved Olivia. She had just been another tool in his scheme. "Olivia," Patricia said gently, "we need to know about the money. How much did Walter steal and how much can be recovered?" Olivia reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I kept track of everything because I was so scared of what we were doing. The total amount Walter took was $237,000. Most of it went to pay his gambling debts, but he kept about $60,000 in cash for the escape plan." $237,000. Nearly everything we had saved over 4 decades of marriage, gone to pay for Walter's reckless gambling and fund his elaborate deception. "Is any of it recoverable?" I asked. Patricia consulted her notes. "The bank transfers can be traced and potentially reversed, but the cash payments to creditors are probably gone forever. We might be able to recover 40 to 50% of the total, but it will take time and legal action. Half of our life savings, maybe, if we were lucky." It was better than nothing, but it meant our retirement plans were destroyed, our financial security was gone, and our family was shattered. "There's something else," Olivia said quietly. "Walter told me that if his plan worked, he was going to leave me too. Terry had a girlfriend in Mexico, and Walter was planning to disappear with her once he had access to all the money. He was going to abandon me just like he abandoned me today." The final betrayal. Walter had manipulated our daughter, destroyed our family, and stolen our life savings, all while planning to abandon Olivia as soon as he no longer needed her. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time since this nightmare had begun. She was 35 years old, but in that moment she seemed like the scared little girl who used to come to me when she had bad dreams. She had made terrible choices, but she had also been the victim of a master manipulator who had exploited her love and fear for his own selfish purposes. "Olivia," I said carefully, "what happens now depends partly on you. Are you willing to testify against Walter? Are you willing to help us recover whatever money can be found?" She nodded immediately. "Yes, Daddy. I'll do whatever it takes to try to make this right. I know I can never undo what I've done, but I want to help catch Walter and get back as much as possible of what he stole from you." Patricia closed her notebook. "Olivia, you're going to be charged with conspiracy and fraud, but given your cooperation and the evidence that you were also a victim of Walter's manipulation, we'll recommend reduced charges and community service, rather than prison time." It wasn't the ending I had hoped for, but it was more justice than I had expected. Our daughter would face consequences for her actions, but she wouldn't spend years in prison for being manipulated by a career criminal. As we prepared to leave the interview room, Olivia reached out and touched my arm hesitantly. "Daddy, do you think you and Mom will ever be able to forgive me?" I looked at Jennifer, and I could see the same conflicted emotions in her eyes that I felt in my heart. Our daughter had betrayed us, but she had also been betrayed herself. Our family had been broken, but perhaps it could be rebuilt. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm willing to try if you are." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was hope, and sometimes hope is enough to start the long journey back to trust. 6 months after that horrible week in October, Jennifer and I stood in the kitchen of our new home, a modest ranch house on the outskirts of town, smaller than the house we had lost, but filled with something our old home had never had: peace. The legal battles were finally over. Walter had been arrested at the Mexican border trying to cross with $63,000 in cash and a fake passport. He was now serving 12 years in federal prison for elder fraud, identity theft, and kidnapping. His accomplice Terry had turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing crucial testimony about Walter's long-term planning and criminal history. We had recovered $142,000 of the $237,000 Walter had stolen. It wasn't everything, but combined with the life insurance payout from my construction company and Jennifer's Social Security, it was enough for us to maintain a comfortable, if more modest, lifestyle. The house we had lost to foreclosure when we couldn't prove ownership during the legal proceedings had been sold, but we discovered we didn't miss it as much as we had expected. The new house was easier to maintain, more energy efficient, and most importantly, it held no memories of betrayal or deception. "The timer's going off," Jennifer called from the living room, where she was arranging flowers in a vase. "Are the rolls ready?" I pulled the dinner rolls from the oven, their golden brown tops steaming in the warm kitchen air. Today was Thanksgiving, our first family holiday since the truth had come out, and Olivia was coming to dinner. The relationship with our daughter had been the hardest part of our recovery. She had served 6 months of house arrest and completed 200 hours of community service, working with elderly victims of financial fraud. The judge had been lenient because of her cooperation and the evidence that she had also been manipulated by Walter, but the legal consequences were only part of the healing process. The emotional work had been much harder. Jennifer and I had spent months in counseling, both together and separately, working through the trauma of betrayal and the complex feelings of anger, sadness, and loss that came with discovering your own child had participated in stealing your life savings. The therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, had helped us understand that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and that rebuilding trust was a choice we had to make every single day. Olivia had been in therapy too, working to understand how she had allowed herself to be manipulated and learning to recognize the warning signs of emotional abuse. She had also joined a support group for people who had been financially exploited by romantic partners, discovering that her experience was unfortunately not unique. The doorbell rang at exactly 4 o'clock. Olivia had always been punctual, even as a child. I opened the door to find our daughter standing on the porch with a covered dish in her hands and uncertainty in her eyes. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. "I brought sweet potato casserole." "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let her enter. "Your mother's in the living room." The first few minutes were always awkward. We were still learning how to be a family again, how to have normal conversations without the weight of what had happened hanging over every word. But gradually, as we prepared the meal together and sat down at the small dining room table, some of the old familiarity began to return. "The house looks beautiful," Olivia said. looking around at the warm lighting and simple decorations Jennifer had chosen. "It feels peaceful." "It is peaceful," Jennifer replied, passing the mashed potatoes. "Your father and I have discovered that we don't need as much space or as many things as we thought we did." It was true. The smaller house had forced us to declutter our possessions, keeping only the items that truly mattered to us. In the process, we had rediscovered things that had been buried in storage for years. Photo albums from our early marriage, letters we had written to each other during my deployment overseas, small mementos from trips we had taken together. "How is the job search going?" I asked Olivia. She had been unemployed since her arrest, struggling to find work with a criminal record and the public knowledge of her involvement in the fraud case. "Actually, I have some good news," she said, a small smile crossing her face. "The Victim Services Organization, where I did my community service, offered me a part-time position. It doesn't pay much, but it's meaningful work, and they said my experience gives me credibility with other victims of financial fraud." Jennifer set down her fork. "You're going to work with elderly people who have been scammed?" "Partly that, but also people of all ages who have been financially abused by romantic partners or family members. I'll be helping them navigate the legal system and connect with resources for recovery." Olivia's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "Dr. Chen thinks it could be really healing for me to help other people who have been through similar experiences." It was fitting, in a way. Our daughter's darkest moment had become the foundation for her opportunity to help others avoid the same trap she had fallen into. There was a circularity to it that felt almost like justice. As we ate dinner, we carefully avoided talking about Walter or the specific details of what had happened. Instead, we shared stories about our new routines, Jennifer's volunteer work at the local animal shelter, my part-time job helping other retirees with home maintenance projects, and Olivia's slow process of rebuilding her life. "I've been thinking about something," Olivia said as we cleared the dishes. "Dr. Chen suggested that it might help if I wrote you both a letter explaining everything I was thinking and feeling during those months when Walter was planning the fraud. Not to make excuses, but to help you understand why I made the choices I made." Jennifer and I exchanged glances. We had talked about this possibility in our own therapy sessions. Dr. Chen had mentioned that many families found it helpful when the offending party was able to articulate their thought process, as long as it was done without trying to shift blame or minimize responsibility. "Would that help you?" I asked carefully. "I think it would. There are things I want you to know about how Walter manipulated the situation, but also things I need to take responsibility for. Times when I knew what we were doing was wrong, but chose to go along with it anyway because I was scared or selfish." Jennifer reached across the table and touched Olivia's hand briefly. "We're open to reading it when you're ready to write it." After dinner, we sat in the living room drinking coffee and watching the sun set through the large picture window that faced west. The silence between us was comfortable now, not strained or filled with unspoken accusations. We were learning to be together again without constantly referencing the trauma that had brought us to this point. "Dad," Olivia said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Do you think you'll ever be able to trust me completely again? I mean, really trust me, not just say you do because we're family?" It was the question I had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. The honest answer was complicated, and I wasn't sure Olivia was ready to hear it. "I don't know," I said finally. "Trust isn't just a decision you make once. It's something you build through consistent actions over time. Right now, I trust that you're genuinely sorry for what happened and that you're working to make better choices, but complete trust, that's going to take longer." "I understand," she said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that I'm committed to earning it back, however long it takes." Jennifer leaned forward in her chair. "Olivia, there's something your father and I want to tell you. We've been working on our will and estate planning with a lawyer, and we want you to know that you're still our beneficiary." Olivia's eyes widened. "Mom, you don't have to." "Let me finish. You're still our daughter, and we still love you. What Walter did doesn't change that. But there are going to be safeguards in place. The money will be held in a trust with an independent administrator, and it will be released to you gradually over time with conditions attached about financial counseling and staying out of legal trouble. It was a compromise we had reached after months of discussion and advice from our lawyer and therapist. We wanted Olivia to know that she was still part of our family and our future, but we also needed to protect ourselves and ensure that our money would be used responsibly. "I think that's fair," Olivia said, tears gathering in her eyes. "More than fair, considering what I did to you." As the evening wound down and Olivia prepared to leave, she turned to us at the door with one final confession. "I want you both to know something. Even when I was helping Walter with his plan, even when I was lying to you and stealing from you, I never stopped loving you. I know that probably doesn't mean much now, but it's true. I just got so scared and confused that I forgot what love actually looks like." Jennifer hugged her tightly. "Love sometimes means making hard choices and facing uncomfortable truths. We're all still learning how to do that." After Olivia left, Jennifer and I sat on our small front porch, wrapped in blankets and watching the stars emerge in the clear November sky. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Jennifer asked, referring to our decision to maintain a relationship with Olivia despite everything that had happened. "I think we made the only choice we could live with," I replied. "She's our daughter. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it doesn't stop being true either." Jennifer nodded, settling more comfortably against my shoulder. "I keep thinking about something Dr. Chen said. That forgiveness isn't about forgetting or pretending something didn't happen. It's about choosing not to let the hurt define your future." We had both changed over the past 6 months. The trauma of betrayal and financial loss had aged us in some ways, but it had also strengthened our relationship with each other. We had learned that we could survive losing almost everything material as long as we still had each other. The money Walter had stolen represented 40 years of hard work, careful saving, and sacrificed pleasures. But sitting there on our porch, I realized that what he had really tried to steal was more valuable than money. Our trust in each other, our sense of security, our faith in family. He had failed. Yes, our retirement would be more modest than we had planned. Yes, we would have to be more careful with money and more cautious about trust, but we were still together, still healthy and still capable of finding joy in simple pleasures. "John," Jennifer said softly, "do you regret fighting back? Do you ever wish you had just let them get away with it to avoid all the pain and complications?" I considered the question seriously. There had been moments during the legal proceedings when I had wondered if pursuing justice was worth the emotional cost. Seeing Olivia handcuffed and led away to serve her sentence had been one of the hardest experiences of my life. But then I thought about all the other families who might become victims if people like Walter were allowed to operate without consequences. I thought about the elderly people Olivia was now working with, who had been devastated by financial fraud because no one had been willing to stand up to their abusers. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. What Walter did was evil, and letting him get away with it would have made us complicit in whatever he did to his next victims." The truth was, we had won something more valuable than money by fighting back. We had reclaimed our dignity, our sense of agency, and our faith in the possibility of justice. We had refused to be victims. As we prepared for bed that night, I found Jennifer standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her teeth with a simple gold wedding band back on her finger where it belonged. The sight of it there, after everything we had been through, filled me with a deep sense of contentment. "No regrets?" I asked, echoing her earlier question. She smiled at me in the mirror. "None. We're broke, traumatized, and estranged from our only child, but somehow I'm happier than I've been in years." "How is that possible?" "Because we know who we really are now and we know what really matters. Everything else is just details." She was right. We had lost money, property, and the illusion of family harmony. But we had gained something more precious. The knowledge that our love for each other could survive any test, and that we were stronger together than anything the world could throw at us. As I turned off the lights and settled into bed beside my wife, I thought about the future. There would be more challenges, more decisions to make about our relationship with Olivia, more adjustments to our reduced circumstances. But for the first time since this nightmare had begun, I was looking forward to facing those challenges together. Walter had tried to destroy us, but he had only made us stronger, and that, I thought as sleep finally came, was the best revenge of all.